guys, welcome to Partially Impartial. This week we'll be sharing our opinions on a lot of the controversial topics that have been coming out as of late. Remember to hook us up with a like or subscribe to support our new channel. Our number one goal of every show is to fairly and evenly represent all sides of these contentious issues. So talking with some of our guests before the show, it's pretty apparent that we all actually have some differing opinions for once. So it should actually make for a pretty interesting show this time. That being said, me and CJ brought back on two of our past guests. So welcome back to the show, Sheldon and Justin.
Thanks, man. Appreciate being on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
So to set the tone of today's show, me and Sheldon both listened to an interesting podcast called It Could Happen Here that actually talks about the probability of a possible second civil war that could happen in the U.S. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the audio clips you're about to share with us, Sheldon?
Yeah, so last time we talked in the podcast, I mentioned this, and you asked me a question that I didn't really have the ability to answer very well. And so I went back and I listened to the first episode again, and it was almost scarily chilling how accurate it is with everything that's going on right now. So I wanted to share a couple clips to kind of iterate how real some of these things are. The first clip that we're going to go over here really just kind of gives a like a story, not actual real life events, of course, because it's kind of a story set in the future 4 years from now, but of what things might be like for the average citizen in the U.S. if there were to be a civil war that strikes. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing that right now.
In the night, rattling the walls and the window of your apartment. This is not the first bomb you've heard, and it sounds far enough away that you know the danger isn't imminent. That surprises you a little bit, the fact that you recognized it's not close. You realize you've now heard enough explosions to have a pretty good ear for them, and when they're close enough to worry about. It's weird how quickly life in a war zone becomes just life. You get up. There's no sense trying to get back to sleep. As you stumble over to the kitchen to grind some coffee, you hear the crack of rifle fire. It's distant too, far enough away that it sounds almost like firecrackers, but you know it's not. You fill the grinder, put on the top and press down. Nothing happens. You realize, belatedly, in your sleep-fogged brain, that the power's out again. You wonder which of the dozen different rebel and insurgents groups in your state might be responsible. You don't even bother to get out your phone and check the news. It doesn't really matter, and you've got shit to do. It's still dark outside, and since you're already up, you might as well take advantage of the situation and beat the crowd to the grocery store. They've been short on everything lately. Thanks to separatists in Northern California, most nuts are basically unavailable. Rebel insurgents have been bombing highways in West Texas, so beef is way up. You don't tend to buy much meat these days anyway, though. All the blackouts make your fridge unreliable, and you can't afford to spend money on stuff that goes bad. You throw on a light jacket and roll downstairs. 2 or 3 years ago, before all this started, you'd have popped in your earbuds and put on some music to accompany the walk. Today, you figure it'd be best to have your wits about you. You're lucky you live so close to the grocery store. There's a police checkpoint on the way, and the vehicle line is always a nightmare this time of day. As you close and lock your door behind you, you try to ignore the pop and shatter of not-so-distant gunfire. You have friends on the separatist side of town. You have a cousin up in the hills. You're not sure what he's doing there exactly, but it's probably part of why eggs have gotten so expensive lately. They all have reasons for what they're doing, and you don't believe the government lying about any of the sides anymore, but you're also not dumb enough to want to stand up and fight. The official death toll is still just a few thousand, but international monitors claim it must be much higher. There are days when you do feel like doing something, maybe even joining your friends. But most days, like today, you've got shit to do. It's 2024, an election year. Every candidate is doing their level best to not call this what it is, a civil war. You hear that phrase out on the street, though, more and more every day. You reach a crosswalk and start to step across. On the left, your eyes are drawn to the massive bulk of a police bearcat as it trundles across the street parallel to you. A man sits up top in the cupola, his hands on a machine gun that, for now, has its nose pointed up in the air. He stares at you, and you try not to stare back. As you hurry along to the supermarket, you ask yourself the question you've asked almost every day for the last 3 years. How did it get this bad?
So, I don't know about you guys, but kind of listening to that gives me chills. Just with some of the undertones of the fact that in some ways with the pandemic right now, some of that's already happening, at least with like the food shortages and things like that. But mainly, I kind of want to gather what some of your guys' thoughts are on that being a reality if things continue with the riots and the extremism happening uh, really on both sides of the spectrum right now. It's just kind of wild.
Yeah, it's a really vivid illustration that he paints out there. I really liked how he did that when I listened to it earlier too. Really like brings you into that moment and you can kind of picture it all happening. And of course, in other countries, they experience things like that all the time, where there's bombs going off in the distance and gunfire, but yet you're still sending your children to school. So, it's definitely possible in that sense that it's probably happening somewhere in the world right now as we speak, that somebody's probably living in that situation right this second. And it's one of those things that, it seems pretty distant and pretty improbable and pretty impossible right now, given how normal life is and has been most of the time. But of course, we would have thought that a pandemic would have been pretty improbable, a year ago or so. But I think it's one of those things that it's interesting to consider. Obviously, none of us really have any idea what could happen, and I know the far right and the far left have both been just basically gathering up as many guns and ammunition as they can. What for? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they just almost fantasize about being able to use those weapons at some point, and it's like how you have gang wars in different neighborhoods. It's almost like they kill your brother and then you justify killing their brother, and then it just turns into this chain of dominoes that fall and fall and fall. And I could potentially see something like that happening if there was a major crisis to initiate that.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things that like we're almost getting to, like in a sense, like I keep mentioning, like losing that fear factor if it does come down to a second outbreak, and then we're trying to control people again when there's already so much unrest. Like it really is a real possibility.
Yeah, that's what scared me about that, is really how probable all that sounded. Especially with how and the kind of detail he got into it about food shortages because of Northern California committing to that separatist movement they already talk about now. I mean, I could realistically see that happening in the rate our social problems are heading. If the government doesn't take some type of actual action, things could get that bad. And like, we can't just give in to defunding the police entirely, but we have to do something, because if we just let the wealth keep going into more hands, like I'm sure you guys have seen the articles that talked about how a lot of billionaires have gotten even richer during this whole pandemic, where a lot of us have been struggling to get money. I mean, that's a problem that feeds into stuff like this a lot, and I like that won't set it off, but like just like what's happening now, it just takes one event, one thing like a George Floyd, where it's like clearly something wrong happened, and it polarizes us immediately, and sides are taken, and all of a sudden something happens. Like what if there's these protests happening, and someone in a MAGA hat shoots an unarmed kid, and then all this, like it only takes one event when we're all so stressed out and polarized already. Is my point.
Justin, have you listened to this podcast?
No, not at all. That was terrifying.
Yeah. That literally leads right into what I'm going to talk to about next, is because that's what he that's literally what he pitches is like what starts this event in the podcast, as he says that he gives like a scenario of this protest in Portland, Oregon, because of Portland, Oregon, it's so polarized. You have the extreme left all inside of Portland, and then surrounding Portland you have very conservative individuals, and all of them have guns. And it talks about how there's like a big protest that's going on. There's a guy in a MAGA hat. This is the scenario that he puts out. A guy in a MAGA hat shoots two people, and then you have the right-wing people praising him, the left-wing people hating him, and it just escalates things just that much further. So that's why I was like, dude, if you listened to this podcast before, because man, that was like on the money.
I mean, I think that's like that speaks to how concerning this is, though. That if like multiple people can see it that clearly, it might be realistic.
Yeah.
This might be probable. I'm concerned.
Yeah,
I'm fucking worried
for
about our
sure.
future as a country.
So the next clip that I want to share really quickly is kind of to go along the lines of the gun ownership that we kind of talked about, and how very polarized both sides are. Now that this is clearly like in a way, I think, in my perspective, a very right wing or conservative person talking about how the left is brainwashing people, and then to bring guns into it. But basically, this is an NRA ad that was aired in June, and it'll kind of talk about what time frame it was aired in. But here, let me go ahead and start getting it going here.
Almost exactly a year after Alex Jones's rally at the RNC, Dana Loesch of the NRA put up a video that seems almost tailor-made to highlight how much worse things got in the months after the election.
They use their media to assassinate real news. They use their schools to teach children that their president is another Hitler. They use their movie stars and singers and comedy shows and award shows to repeat their narrative over and over again. And then they use their ex-president to endorse the resistance, all to make them march, make them protest, make them scream racism, and use their ex-president to endorse the resistance, all to make them march, make them protest, make them scream racism and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia, to smash windows, burn cars, shut down interstates and airports, bully and terrorize the law-abiding, until the only option left is for the police to do their jobs and stop the madness. And when that happens, they'll use it as an excuse for their outrage. The only way we stop this, the only way we save our country and our freedom, is to fight this violence of lies with the clenched fist of truth. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
Jeez, dude, are you sure that wasn't recorded recently?
No, dude, this that is from the very first episode of the podcast of It Could Happen Here by Alex Jones. Have to give credit to him for this. He did all the work. But yeah.
Wait, not the Alex Jones, right?
Oh, just kidding. It's not Alex Jones. Is
Yeah, I
the
was
name of the
gonna
guy.
say.
Dude, that's just what it says.
Yeah, Alex Jones is the guy that he references.
That he references. Crap. I can't remember the name of the guy that runs the podcast. Because I think his name is Alex too. Or oh no, just kidding. It's Robert Evans. Robert Evans. So credit to Robert Evans. Excuse me. That was I misspoke. But yeah, no, that this was recorded. I can tell you right now when this podcast, this episode dropped. It dropped in March 28th of 2019. That's when that was recorded, which means that ad was recorded before that.
It really shows, because honestly, there has been a lot of racism and things like that, but it also kind of shows that even before this kicked off, that the left, one of their main tools in their belt, not to say that racism isn't a real thing, but one of their tools that they have in their belt is to kind of overblow racism and to just play the race card. And that shows that that's something they've been doing for not just recently, but for decades probably.
Right. And it's it's media that's used on either side of the political spectrum. Like, I think oftentimes a lot of media sources, in my eyes, tend to, at least some of like the more like better known ones, kind of seem to lean right. Correct me if I'm wrong. But then Hollywood and some of those others tend to lean on the other spectrum of left. And so, they mention, like, they use their movie stars, their comedians, and their musicians to talk about the racism, the xenophobia, all that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, they do.
Yeah.
And
Have you seen Saturday Night Live recently?
yeah, no, I actually haven't, but
Yeah. Oh man. Not even recently, just every single episode of Saturday Night Live.
Ever since Trump got elected, it's just it's completely anti-Trump, completely pro-democratic, no shame, nothing.
And it's fucking hilarious.
it absolutely is.
It is good. I feel it is a little biased, but yeah, it is good.
Yeah. So definitely wild how accurate that is. I mean, if you just think in the perception, like if you go back and just listen to that section, and just think about everything that you've heard on the news and just completely block out the fact that this is something from the NRA, holy shit. Like, it's just so scarily accurate. Like, every time that I listen to that little bit right at the end when it says, "This is the I am the NRA and I am how I protect America and its rights," I get the scared chills. You know?
Yeah, they could have definitely just they could replay that commercial today and just pretend like it was brand new, and it would make even more better sense now than it did a year ago.
Oh my gosh, I'm almost fearful of like people listening to that and like getting riled up over it, you know, because that's not the idea of it. It's to bring awareness to the fact that we're going in a direction that's going to change the world, the country, everything that we know for a good damn long time.
Till about 2030, according to the fourth turning.
Oh, none of these changes like are even permanent, you know, like it's these things are going to continuously change until, you know, we do get something that's set in stone that's actually, you know, workable and agreeable upon all sides.
I think we're going in a pretty dangerous direction on both sides. Oh, I just think like the direction we're going on is really dangerous on both sides because, you know, I can attest to it. I go to a liberal institution right now. You know, I attend Cal State University, Long Beach. Super liberal. It can be like a liberal boot camp. I mean, like the professors would really chastise people and convince classrooms to turn on someone who's openly conservative. Not to say that I am. You know, I take no political sides. I think they're both wrong. But like, you know, professors will openly turn on students. And I think that's super problematic. Like universities should be places of free speech objectively, you know, but like the professors can really impose their biases that heavy onto these young students is a problem. But then, you know, you talk to older conservatives and they're just entirely dense, you know, and it's a problem on both sides where they're so committed to their ideals that they ignore logic entirely. And, you know, when you talk about the race thing, yeah, but you talk about the race thing, and I think both sides are really, really doing the same thing. Like the Democrats and the liberals, yeah, they absolutely they put this spotlight on it, and they race bait, and they use it to their advantage, and they use it to distract, and they use it to try and harbor votes, and they do nothing ever. You know, they never do substantial policy, they never do anything, and they act like they care. But then the Republicans just ignore it entirely and act like it's not a real thing. And both of those create this kind of problem where it leads to riots in the streets. Like you can't have a party that pretends to care. That's fucking bullshit. But then the other party just does nothing. So I mean, like both parties are setting us up for a direction that's not good. Is my point.
That's what I said. Who wants to buy an island?
Yeah. CJ is offering to go in on an island with anybody that wants to go in on the
And
island.
get the hell out of here.
How much is an island?
You know, it can't be that much. Like, there's movie stars that have islands, so I mean, if we could raise enough, then, you know, GoFundMe, let's get an
We're not no
island.
damn movie stars, man. Come on.
So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to share, just on you know, to share a little bit more around how a lot of what I'm seeing just on Facebook and in the news every day, about everything that's going on in the world and the direction that we're heading, and how it kind of correlates very heavily with this podcast of it could happen here. So I recommend people listen to it to learn a little bit about the possibility of things, the way they get ahead, because he gives a lot more information in later podcasts about kind of the recipe for disaster that is seen in other countries and kind of the build up to their civil war, because in past civil wars, he talks about this in this episode even, that typically it's been kind of something that just like happened. Like the Civil War, the first American Civil War started with the attack on Fort Sumter. The Revolutionary War, which was a civil war for the United Kingdom and England, started with the Battle of Lexington and Concord. But civil wars like Syria is something that just kind of grew, and it started from riots. So that's kind of like the new age of how civil wars are starting. Like even the war that started in Ukraine back in 2014, it was riots on the street that grew and grew and grew to then Russian-backed militias and extremist groups started killing people.
Well, the National Guard on the street is probably the biggest mistake I feel like we can make in that sense, because that's just showing military presence, and like it's definitely still there, day to day. I just had a friend that posted pictures, and he was in I think he was in Huntington, and just happened to run across the rally, and there was the National Guard all mobbing, chilling.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I actually posted a picture on my Facebook yesterday. It didn't like go very far, but I saw a picture that someone shared of some police or military APCs with. I'm going to send it to our little Facebook group right now so you guys can see it. But basically, military APCs and police and National Guard standing at like an intersection. It looks like. And there's one protester standing in front of them with a sign. He looks like he's a black African American individual. And then I put a picture below it of the Tiananmen Square massacre in China, and just drawing the similarities between the two and how scarily similar they look.
It's kind of interesting because there would be pretty unlikely chance that we would get into a large war with another country, but I think there's a lot of attempts to kind of destroy other countries from the inside, especially like possibly from China, because I think one of the best ways, if you were trying to ruin another country and you didn't want to do it on such a known way where everyone could blame you, it would probably be to attempt to start a civil war in their country. And like I said earlier, like I don't think this civil war would happen unless it had a big thing to really kick it off. And this really, I think what could be the fuel to that is the fact that we're holding all these protests and riots and demonstrations during basically the peak of a pandemic, and this could really create a ton of civil unrest. And something I said last podcast, maybe there's potentially some ill intent behind trying to get all these protests organized.
Yeah, we had talked about that before, even just the fact that, you're getting a bunch of minorities riled up and they're all protesting in the streets, even had it be, being peaceful, even if it's like, not the extremists, but like we keep pointing out, just all these groups of people that are, butts to nuts, and they're not giving any sort of care to 6 feet, let alone 6 inches. Like, they're marching side by side, and, it's totally like, power to them, and, give them hell, but fuck, do it safe. And don't make this pandemic any worse, because you know what, we're about 11 days into people protesting, not even just here, but in other countries as well. And, when that starts coming down to it, these groups of people like conjugating, it's just going to result in like this huge, I don't know, I'm pretty sure it's going to be the second wave. I mean, I'm not calling it, but I've been calling it for a while now, so I'm still sticking to my prediction. Just in about a week or so, we're going to start seeing numbers jump.
Yeah, every day that passes, I start to think it's looking more and more likely.
And if you make all these minorities sick, then, I mean, hell, you get them out of the way. I mean, that's just like, you know, the way that I'm sure they're thinking too. Like, okay, let's militarize and let's make sure we protect the things we need to protect. But go ahead and let them march, let them cause a ruckus. Like, we'll take forever. We're not going to change our police policies. And I mean, I even read something today that was just like, you know, let's force every police officer to go through 4 years of, you know, college and 4 years of this, and, you know, have to get certified in like emotional training and certified in this and certified in that, which like honestly would like make sense to me. Just make it a hell of a lot harder to be a cop like it is to be a doctor. Like, people that just, you know, want power and shit right now can just jump in and like, you know, pass a couple tests and have to, you know, take them about a year, but you could become a cop. Like, Jerry, you could become a cop if you fucking did enough shit and just like, you know, as long as you pass the drug test. And, you know, it's kind of like one of those things that I feel like when it comes down to it, that's where it ends up. Like, you know, there's not going to be any change. They're just waiting for it to, you know, bubble down, all these people to get sick and kind of fall out of the way. And then, you know, then they don't have to worry about changing anything. And then they could just move forward with their present agenda.
I think maybe one of the reasons why they don't necessarily train cops so much here is just because there's such a high demand for police. At least this is what I was thinking, and there's probably such a high demand for police because of how intense of a drug war we're having and how incentivized we are to try and keep all of our prisons full. They probably don't have the capability to get all those cops all trained through 4 years of college and get them out there gathering up criminals to fill up the prisons, which, you know, brings us back to the topic of legalizing drugs all around. I know we heard Sheldon and CJ's opinion on that. Do you have an opinion on that, Justin?
Absolutely, legalize them all. And the drug war, you get tax revenue, you save the money that you spend on police. Consumers get a safer product. You don't allow gangs to militarize and overthrow entire countries like they're doing right now in Central and South America. The money we'd save on the DEA, we could use all that tax revenue and start funding addiction centers and things of that nature. I mean, I just see nothing but benefits with the way the war on drugs has played out. Prohibition's a real life example. Look at giant waste of money. I mean, I think you're seeing marijuana legalization working pretty well in every state that's committed to it. You're not seeing addiction rates spike. You're seeing tax revenues come in. I'd say California passed a pretty stupid law compared to other states, but Colorado's a great example. We should have just mirrored them. No, but I just mean as far as
Have you seen Utah's laws?
I think Colorado's like.
I think Colorado's a fantastic example.
Although I'm pretty close to getting my card out here, but still, it's like, it's just ridiculous, and you're only qualified for a certain amount of time, and then you have to renew it. And I mean, it's just like, goddamn, let people fucking smoke weed, get high, fucking chill the fuck out. That's what everybody needs right now.
Collect some tax revenue. Come on, the state needs the money. Let's all be real here.
The government needs the money. They're just printing it right now. Give it back to the. They're all spending it on drugs. At least right now, everybody's just, you know, either saving or, you know, paying off debts and all that shit, and just like kind of buying their basic needs. But then when it comes down to it, like, you know, if everybody's pumping their money, and if, like, you know, if I could go pick up some Molly for the weekend and do it like legit, or get some mushrooms and shit, then hell yeah, I'd be all about it. Like, no doubt. Like, even if it cost me an extra, like, you know, $40, as long as I knew it was like semi-regulated and like, you know, like wouldn't kill me or anything, then like, okay, hell yeah, fucking jump on that party bus.
Well, I think it's safe to say our show's getting removed from YouTube.
No, but think about how much money YouTube could make from all of the ads for the legal drugs. They benefit too.
Yeah, man.
Try heroin today.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how we could actually implement something like that. And who knows, maybe there would be a little bit of a spike in meth and heroin. I don't know. It's really uncertain topic. The way I see that is, you know, if people really want to kill themselves using meth and heroin, then I say go ahead and let them do that. You know, it's evolution working. And if they all kill themselves out, then maybe we'll have a generation of less addicts. And plus, I mean, it's a free country. I think I think if it comes to terms of only harming yourself, then we should basically allow anybody to do that. And right now it's almost worse if you decide to do meth or heroin, because you're not only harming yourself, but you're also supporting this really dangerous drug trade.
Well, and it's hilarious because that's exactly what alcohol is. Like, you see people get fucking ridiculously addicted, and I'll even use myself as an example. As, like, I was an alcoholic fucking bad for 4 or 5 years, and Jerry, you see me fucking get smashed fucking more than several occasions. But I mean, like, that's like the thing. Like, if people were to, like, people are doing that now legally, and like the fact that, like, people, like, I've done mushrooms before, essentially, and been super chill. Like, had a great experience. Didn't fucking black out, nothing. But then when it comes down to it, like, people start, tripping out on alcohol, and that's when you get drunk drivers and fucking people crashing and fights and fucking abuse and all that stuff. And that's just when it gets ridiculous.
Well, I think
like, that's why I think alcohol is dangerous in its own. Like, probably the most dangerous drug.
Probably, but I think a lot of that is access. I've been around a lot of addicts in my life, and I just think at the end of the day, people are going to use if they're going to use. Like, if there's this many addicts, well, it's illegal. I really don't think it's going to change that much if we were to legalize it. And then there's the safer product, and then you're not allowing people's drug consumption to fuel other illegal activity, which is oftentimes worse than just isolated drug use.
Yeah, I agree, and there's almost this chain reaction that I can imagine, because let's say, cause right now drugs are all associated with all the other bad things in life, and people, when they use drugs, then they end up stacking on all this guilt and all this shame onto themselves, especially if it's a really hard drug, and then and other people are also throwing that guilt and that shame their way, and then their whole self-worth just gets destroyed as they imagine themselves being this addict. And then once their self-worth is destroyed, then they are more likely to go to those escapes. So I could see in some situations, maybe legalizing it could potentially lead to less addictive and less people killing themselves with the drugs.
Oh yeah, exactly.
More money into the rehabilitation.
That is right.
And like, hell, like, that's what's funny too, is like, growing up as a kid, like that was always the rush. Like, you got the rush out of it being illegal half the fucking time. So it's like, even if you were to just like openly make things like legal, to whatever, like, they'd be out there, and then, like, that's the thing, like, just collect the fucking revenue off of it, like, make the money that's already going to be made anyways and spent anyways, and just make it all legit. It's already a business, just make it a legit business and tax it.
And I'll admit this is a total reach right now, but I also believe that if we were to legalize drugs and end our war on drugs, it would immediately help with our illegal immigration issue as well. Because like, the countries wouldn't be owned by gangs anymore because they wouldn't have the funding, and maybe there'd be like this period of turmoil where they figure out how to assume power. But I mean, just ending the drug war would make those countries safer and create less incentive to leave in the first place. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've pretty much destroyed Mexico because we've made drugs illegal here, and it's brought all that incentive over to there, and that's just simply not going to get fixed until the drug problem gets resolved.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's enough on that topic. We're pushing 35 minutes right now, so I say let's go ahead and talk about one of these videos that's been circulating recently. It's been getting so much attention lately. Our viewers have probably already seen it going around. It's the video of these riot police it looks like they're advancing in this line, and this older gentleman runs out in front of the line, and it looks like he's holding one of their helmets. I can't tell if he's trying to give it back to him. It didn't necessarily seem like he was trying to hand it to him, but he did run out to him, and it sounds like he's trying to like talk to one of the officers and tell him something relatively important. And the riot guy is just not having any of it, and him and I believe another person comes up and they kind of just give him a pretty soft push. And unfortunately, because he's a frail guy, he falls over backwards. Looks like he trips over his own footing, or he doesn't take the push well at all, and he falls back, and he actually goes off of camera there for a second, and then to me it looks like he falls and his head just gets whiplashed into the concrete with a ton of force. And then the camera looks over, and within a second or two, there's already a pool of blood starting to come out of his ear and form around his head. And the camera guy is shouting, somebody help him, somebody help him. It's really traumatic thing. And it looks like a couple of the cops kind of say, no, don't pay attention. And they just say, keep pushing, keep pushing. And then eventually someone stops and starts to help him. And because of this video, two of the cops that were directly involved, I believe they're getting charged with assault, and I think they got fired as well. And then all 57 members of that advancing team, they've all put in their resignation to be on that part of the force as well. So it's really this issue that I think demonstrates a lot of this whole police brutality issue all in one video, because my opinion would be that the old guy probably shouldn't have gone out in front of an advancing riot line that are dealing with protesters, and their orders is probably to give everyone a nudge, give them a push them back, and then it just so happened to be that this old guy had really bad balance or just couldn't handle that type of push, and because the police officer did his correct technique in pushing him, it resulted in what looks like a pretty serious concussion. So, and then social media just went crazy on these officers, and they just got so demonized. So in my opinion, I can kind of understand why all 57 of those other officers also resigned to kind of protest the lashback, because we're seeing this constant demonization of police officers in general. What do you guys think?
Oh, man. I mean, in my sense, like, it's one of those things that it's just, like, common fucking sense. Like, if I was faced with a 75-year-old man that's trying to fight me, like, am I going to throw a punch at him? Or am I going to use excessive force? Like, or am I going to, like, push him over? Or, like, seriously, like, just when it comes down to even just, like, the age and the way that he looked, like, he should have been in an old folks home, like, let alone being out marching. So, like, the fact that officers were, like, even hands-on with him, like, they could have easily been like, oh, hey, dude, can you, like, step aside? And I'm sure, like, he would have done it. It didn't look like he was, like, screaming at him or anything. It was just, like, he was, like, calmly kind of, like, walking up. And in my sense, it looked like he was just trying to hand him his helmet back to him. So, but then there's also, like, that, controversy going around where it seems like he was, faking it, and that he wasn't really bleeding and didn't really fall that hard and kind of leaned into it a little bit. But I don't know. It's just one of those things that I feel like they took it too far, and they know they took it too far, and they don't want to get called out on their bullshit anymore. So they just all stepped away from that force.
Yeah, I got to say that there's like a basic kind of understanding that we all should have, where it's like elderly people and young children, and you kind of have to be more gentle with them, like not to like dehumanize them or be ageist, but like, I mean, like if I got in a fist fight with you, I'd get in less trouble than if I got in a fist fight with an 85-year-old man, even if both of you started. If I beat the shit out of an 85-year-old man, I'd get in a lot of trouble.
It's just like if you were fighting a baby.
Yeah, I'd get in a lot of trouble if I beat the fuck out of a baby.
Exactly. Elderly abuse, child abuse.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we haven't seen any babies get tear gassed or something like that so far.
There's been kids that have been hit by rubber bullets and stuff.
And kids that have been hit by some of the pepper spray and stuff like that too in videos. Yeah, I pulled up the video again just to kind of watch it, and I can definitely see where it looks like they didn't push him very hard, and that maybe just the way that he's standing, he doesn't really have good footing, and so because he's so close to the officers, they push him and then just kind of continue advancing, would throw him off of his balance and whatnot. It's kind of interesting, though, as he's approaching the officers. Yeah, he's got this helmet in his hand. It looks like it's a riot helmet, as it's black on the back and then has the visor. It doesn't look like it would be any kind of like motorcycle helmet or anything. Looks like he's holding his cell phone in his right hand. And while he's talking to the officers, he kind of like motions with his cell phone to the officer on the right of him, and just kind of pointing around talking to him. And then they just continue to tell him to back up, push him, and then he hits the ground, you know? So it just kind of blows me away the way that like I feel like it's excessive because of the way that he was approaching them and talking to them. It wasn't belligerent. It wasn't like they were presenting any danger to the officers themselves. He didn't have anything right accessibly in his hands that would in any way be maybe the helmet could be a bludgeoning object, but the officers are wearing enough gear that it wouldn't hurt them. They could subdue him in a less confrontive way very quickly to get that out of his hand. But the pushing of him and then the just continuing to walk, you can see that right after they push him, the two officers are like, the one that was directly in front of him is about to bend over and help him, and then another officer steps in and like grabs him and just kind of like, no, walk away. The one that was on the right that kind of did more of the pushing is just continue to look at the old man on the ground. He turns around for a second, just kind of like touches his vitals. They're like, oh shit, what did I just do? Kind of a thing. And you can see the almost immediate shame, like, man, like these are real people. I think in on both spectrums of this, like these are both real people. I think mistakes were made. Things weren't handled the way they should have been handled or could have been handled. This old man, this elderly man, is definitely hurt. And but in that instance, in that moment, that's what the officers did. It's sad that they did what they did, but I don't feel like it's not like it was premeditated. I don't think they woke up that morning and said, I'm going to, be out here in this riot and end up pushing somebody down today. I'm not going I'm going to go out and hurt somebody today. I think it's a matter of it was an instance where it was a moment, it happened, and there's nothing that could be done. But I don't get the fact of the aftermath of the officer like saying, hey, don't help him out. It ends up being like towards the end ish of the video when it's the two National Guard members that are in the back that actually kneel down to start helping the old man.
Yeah, but they're trained to react in the moment, and that's my only issue with like your explanation too. Is like, yeah, like it's something that happened and it's something that happened in the moment, but I want police officers that are able to judge if that's a fucking if it's a cell phone or if it's a gun before I get shot.
The thing is though, with how just volatile the job is, I think no matter what level of training we get to, there is always going to be those just accidental things. I definitely don't think, like you said, the cop was attempting to hurt him, but he probably right when he pushed him, he was like, oh shit, I probably shouldn't have done that. And the one thing I will say, because I do agree that he probably shouldn't have done that and could have definitely handled it better. But one thing I find fairly unhealthy is just the total demonization of all the police because of that. And you can tell that they are just getting really, really sick of that because of the 57 officers that resigned. And then also, I believe it was you, Sheldon, shared this in the group chat. It says here, word is 14 Minneapolis officers quit today and 46 more are filing for early retirement. Their words before they left, you're on your own. I used to be firmly in the suit up and protect them anyway camp, but today part of me just wants to let them have what they think they want. So I think it's really it's strange because the black people feel singled out, and then now the police officers themselves are experiencing a form of discrimination.
Oh yeah, for sure. My best friend growing up's a cop, and he'll barely talk to me at this moment just because he knows my standpoint on a lot of the shit, but then also he doesn't want to, put himself in any sort of position, and I don't want to, put myself in any position with him or anything. So it's just kind of one of those things that's just untalked about. But there's several other people that I know that are even in the police force that, I see their posts on Facebook and they're just, they're sick of it, and they're, like, what the hell, they're demonizing us, and kind of like the same thing. Like I have friends with people that have been in the police force for, 40 years, and they're still at that same point. They're just like, whatever, like, kind of like what you're saying, like if this is what they're asking for, this is what they'll get. But then again, I've seen a lot of like personally, even just a lot of semi like racism, like are just like, okay, like if they just, this is what they deserve. Like if they're going to come out and riot, then, obviously they're going to get pepper gassed, or, oh, they're going to cry over pepper gas or rubber bullets. Next time we'll use real bullets. Like, it's just like shit like that. Just like does not need to be said by a cop.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think like that exact point is like, we're not necessarily demonizing them. It's not like this narrative just matriculated out of thin air and we're only applying it right now to this present circumstance. This is a narrative. Yeah, it's a narrative that's been forming for a long time and no one's ever really addressed. I mean, people have been really displeased with the police for a long time. And this is where people are finally, this is a breaking point. This is like a Rodney King riots moment. It's not like that just happened that day. That was just the event that set it off. No. And this is it's difficult though, because like they, like people are fed up and they're saying like, oh, they're demonizing us. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you stood up against the cops that are doing bullshit and are out there planting drugs on people and making shit up and shooting unarmed people, if you were like saying that's wrong and the police shouldn't have that instead of defending them, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be demonizing all police. But the police don't do that. They unify very tightly together. It's very observable that they do that. And I'm sure you're seeing this. I'll just make a couple more points, and then because I can feel like people want to say things. I can sense it. But you're seeing it a lot on the internet. Like people protesting with signs like, I have to study like 1,200 hours to be a hairdresser, and a cop studies less than that. And I think like that's a valid point, but I think a better point is that how much like a lawyer has to do 3 committed years in law school to be released into the world saying that, okay, you understand the law enough to like represent it in the court. And like, I just think there is a problem that the police receive much less training than that. And a lot of that is physical training as well. And then they're released into the world saying you can enforce the law. You understand it enough to enforce it. And I think there is a weird discrepancy there. And I think we should change the way that the police academy structures. But I also think that saying defund the police and having no police is absolutely naive in the world we live in right now.
Yeah, I think what you said there about how they unify, I think that is probably one of the main things that could really, that we could change about the police culture that could really help. I know, thinking back to the George Floyd video, there's that officer, I think his name is Tao or something, who was just standing there, holding everyone at bay while George Floyd is being murdered. And I guarantee it ran through everyone's head, like, why don't you as a cop tell that other cop that he's fucking up? And I think and I've heard that from multiple sources, like that podcast, It Could Happen Here, on one of his later ones, he goes through another situation of how the police all have each other's back. And I guarantee it would be like a moment of embarrassment for that Tao guy to tell that guy to get off him. It'd be like a really weird, embarrassing situation. But man, I think that could really go a long way. And these protests are really flaring up a lot of things. I guarantee there's a lot of cops out there that are thinking like, man, what could I do to, at minimum, at least avoid becoming the next Derek Chauvin? Because nobody wants that.
Yeah, I think that one thing that these protests, and literally like with the stack of the pandemic, the protests, the economy going down, it is literally bringing all the skeletons out of the closet, every single one. And it's the napalm to the fire that's already been burning, honestly. Like, and I say napalm because just the escalation of things ever since the George Floyd death. Like, that has been a huge turning point in the history of just this year, you know. And because we had people protesting the economy and nothing ever came of that, like as far as like people getting arrested or things going bad. But as soon as this happened, it just went from 0 to 100 real quick.
Yeah, I absolutely did not expect it to get like this. I remember seeing that video come across my feed, and I shared it as well. And I definitely thought that was the end of it. It would, maybe a day or two more we'd be hearing about it, and then next thing you know, there's tons of protests all across the whole world. I know somebody also in our chat sent us a video of people in the UK that were actually tearing down this statue, and I looked into it a little further, and there was like tens of thousands of people there, which is just so it really shows that there's something more going on here. There's no way that this was all just because of George Floyd, especially not all across the whole world. There's definitely issues, probably issues of racism and issues of police brutality, but then also I think issues that people can't necessarily put into words, especially when it comes to the economy, because nobody really understands what's going on there. People just feel like they are working their whole lives and there's nothing bright in their future. And people just feel like now is the time to stand up. And, if it wasn't for the pandemic, then I would say maybe let's get all of these protests all together and make one giant protest out of it. But because of the pandemic, I don't think that's the best idea.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is the pandemic and the failing economy that has allowed so many people the ability to be at these protests, first of all. I mean,
and the unity is awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean it's I mean, to a point, yes. I think it's great. The unity is great. Until, we start, like, people start getting hurt from either side, you know. Um it's just I think the ramping up of the violence. I don't know, I haven't heard a whole lot of actual protests going violent as of late with recent protests, but at least what happened in Minneapolis and other, like, I know that LA got pretty crazy for a minute there. I'm sure you know a lot about that, Justin. I had a friend who lived out there and was actually living in an apartment complex that was really close to where everything was going on, and he said, "Deuces, I'm out," and like left, and then later heard that, like, one of the bigger parts of the protest was literally going down his street. So it's wild. Um, and scary. When you get enough people together that are angry, things happen.
Things like civil war.
Oh, for sure. That's how a lot of things. Yep, exactly. That's how a lot of things escalate, and then you end up with more than anybody can handle, and all sides clash, and then you end up with a shit show.
Yeah, it's like the end of that clip that I shared with you about the NRA. You've got they're gonna preach racism, xenophobia, and whatever else she says. The police are gonna show up and do their job, and then they're gonna use that as well as something to use against the entire system overall. And it's happening. You're watching it happen. And I'm a moderate independent. Like, I see this. I see what's going on both sides, and honestly, both sides scare the fucking shit out of me. So
I know, I'm like the person watching from the sidelines, just waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's nice to be on the sidelines. It's a good time to be unbiased. I got to say that. I think we've all felt what it's like to be biased in our life, and man, it's such a relief to just be detached from all the sides and just only be watching to kind of just to pick up on the facts. I got to say it's a really much more relaxing place to be than to be on one of the sides that's saying that things should or shouldn't be a different way. I think as I've grown and matured, I've kind of stepped away from what should or shouldn't be and kind of more focused on just what is, and why it is the way it is.
I actually think it's kind of stressful to not have any practical option when I go to vote. Like I don't even have a choice that's practical. Like no, I look at these and it's like, oh, they both are terrible in basically every way.
Just makes you not want to vote.
Yeah, like I guess I'll flip. What's my favorite color? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like what a fucking stupid way to vote.
Yeah, and voting independent is basically just like
Get away.
voting for either one of
Yeah.
them, because obviously the independent's not going to win. So definitely frustrating. Hopefully that is something that we see change in our lifetime. It'd be surreal to actually be able to vote for a president that I feel like I genuinely support. But yeah, I think
well, that's something.
go ahead.
Well, like I was sorry, real quick. I just want to say like that's like disheartening about these protests, because like CJ pointed out, there's unity, and like I don't know if I call it unity. Like if there was unity, we'd be marching for a really clear, concise goal, and like there's enough people and anger and like there's enough people together out there for something monumental to happen, but we don't really have unity. We just have collective rage.
Yeah.
You know, like collective rage is dangerous. Unity's great.
Well, there's no conversations going on.
No, I mean like
there's nothing going on that's like being trying to, there's the president's not sitting down going, okay, let's make these changes, like, law, let's fix this.
No
like,
one is. I mean,
that's why nothing has happened.
Like, why aren't we talking about the fact that they charged all 4 cops? They increased his charge to 2nd-degree murder, and there's more protests. Like, what the fuck do we do? Like, how do you stop this? Because there's no unity. They're not demanding anything clear.
The problem with it is I think that it started around this Black Lives Matter movement, which I'm totally for. I believe that 100%, that they do matter. Black lives do matter. But there's been the radicalized undertones that have come underneath and taken over these riots, and the skeletons are coming out of the closet, and now it's not about like at least the riots, not the protests, the riots, because there's a difference. The riots have started to be more about power than the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, and just to quote one of my my uncles, I was messaging him today, and he said he calls it recreational outrage, and I think that's a really good term to describe it. And I think honestly, I always like to look at things from like an emotional or psychological standpoint, and like you said, they basically got what they wanted. The cops are all charged. I think in this case, at least, it's pretty likely that they will be charged and put in jail. But I think on probably these protests is probably some of the funnest things that these people have done for a while, and some of them are more like meaningful things, and then so it's almost like, oh, they got charged. Well, I still want to protest over something. It was such a great time. I feel like I'm part of this big thing now. And, so it's almost like a little bit of a letdown if they were to say that they got what they wanted. There's still more recreational outrage that they want to spread.
I won't say that I liked watching a cop car burn, but being there watching a cop car burn was pretty radical.
Probably fun. Yeah, it's probably pretty awesome.
Yeah,
it was entertaining.
Yeah, no, definitely. I took it in.
It was. Not that whether like the entertainment was like something that you necessarily got this high of joy.
I wasn't getting a kick out of it. I was laughing, Yeah, no, I was just watching, and I'm such an observer that it was just like, oh shit, cool. Like I'm fucking here to watch this go down. This is gonna be on the news, and sure enough, like it was on the news like nationwide.
Yeah. Along with Bowman. So. But anyway.
Yeah, Bowman, dumbass. I'm glad I got out of there before that guy showed up.
I gotta say, like when I'm watching, because I've been really following all these protests and riots, there's a part of me that's like, come on, someone just do something crazy, I'm not really watching just to see people gather. I kind of want to see something crazy go down, and that's just our human side of us. I don't think there's anything right or wrong about that, but I do think it's important to note that. So with that being said, was there anything you guys wanted to add before I go ahead and close it out here?
I had one thing to add, and like I don't know what you guys would stand on this, but in a sense, like if I was walking down the street and I saw anybody, cop, anybody fucking like leaning on somebody's neck to where they could not breathe and it going down for that fucking long. I don't care if you're a cop or if you're National Guard, your army. I don't care if you're a blood, crip, whatever. Like, if I'm watching somebody die in front of me, I would have kicked the shit out of that cop that was leaning on his neck or kneeling on his neck. And, like, I mean, even if I was just a citizen walking by, I don't give a shit if that would have put me in jail. That could have saved that guy's life, and nobody did that. And that's, I think, the most disappointing thing about all of it.
Yeah, I think that's something that's all ran through a lot of people's head watching that, was just the feeling that they would have done something. And of course, it's a little different while you're there, and who knows what would have really gone down. Because I mean, there's a couple cops there, you would have probably got your ass beat, maybe even gotten in trouble. But yeah, like you said, in the long term, it would have been a good thing, even if you could have just gotten him off him just for a second. Could have been enough to save his life. So that being said, I think we'll go ahead and close out here. It's been a really awesome conversation. So our listeners, remember to give us a like or subscribe, and you'll be hearing more from us.
Yep. Share us on Facebook. Share us with all your friends.
Yeah.
Definitely. Good talking, guys.